Okay, let's dive in. Welcome to the deep dive. This is the YTV canon where we don't just look at American icons. We put them on the lift, strip off the chrome, and really examine the guts of the machine. Today, that machine is Harley-Davidson.
That's absolutely right. We're not here to talk about motorcycles as just, transportation. We're dissecting a system. Our mission today is a systemic synthesis of Harley-Davidson.
A systemic synthesis. So what does that actually mean for you, the listener?
It means we're moving far beyond the visible outcomes, the sales figures or the glossy mythology, to uncover the structural mechanics, the persistent constraints, and the core incentives that have shaped this company for over a century.
Right. Think of this as a blueprint reading. We want you to understand how this complex structure functions. We are not offering stock predictions or drawing conclusions about whether HD will succeed or fail in the electric future.
No, none of that. Our job is simply to expose the gears beneath the surface.
And those gears, interestingly, started turning not in some garage with guys dreaming of freedom on the open road, but under the very rigid requirements of military logistics.
Exactly. We have to begin with the foundational system builder for this whole story, the military-industrial nexus.
Let's start with the origins, because they're almost unbelievably humble. We tend to forget that every icon starts somewhere small. William Harley and Arthur Davidson, they founded the company in 1903.
And they were working out of a shed, a tiny shed, only 10 by 15 feet in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. They were really just hobbyists at that point.
Very slow hobbyists, it seems. They sold exactly one machine that entire first year.
Just one. But the growth curve after that, it just became exponential because they were focused on reliability and mechanical integrity from the very beginning.
Okay, so by 1910, they're selling over 3,000 bikes. Fast forward another 10 years, 1920, and the company has achieved true scale. They're pushing out 28,000 motorcycles a year.
And they're aggressively expanding into overseas markets. I mean, that's a monumental leap in less than 2 decades.
But that growth wasn't just a function of, clever marketing or strong civilian demand. There was something else.
There was. The defining forcing function for the entire Harley-Davidson system, the thing that gave it financial stability and forced its technological maturity, was U.S. military procurement.
See, this is where the synthesis really begins. The government didn't just become a big customer. They basically imposed a structure on HEG.
It's a perfect way to put it. Military needs scaled their production to levels that were, frankly, far beyond what consumer demand required at the time.
And crucially, it forced them into this rigid, repeatable technological standardization.
It had to. You can't service 20,000 units in the field if every single one is slightly different. Harley-Davidson's survival and then later its dominance were just inextricably linked to the military-industrial complex.
They sort of got their feet wet during the Pancho Villa expedition in 1916, right?
That's right, providing bikes for reconnaissance and logistical support along the Mexican border. But really, that was just a test run.
World War I was the true system scaling event. The American expeditionary forces needed reliable transport, and HD stepped up.
They stepped up in a huge way. They supplied over 20,000 motorcycles to the war effort.
20,000. And to put that number in perspective, by 1917, that was roughly 50% of the company's total production.
Half their entire business, half their annual revenue stream was dependent on the Department of Defense. This kind of volume required industrial precision, mass assembly techniques, and, maybe most importantly, a standardized product that could be repaired anywhere in the world.
And this military relationship established something else, a sort of secondary system of technical knowledge that would pay these unexpected dividends decades later.
Yes, exactly. Since they were deploying thousands of machines overseas, they had to make sure those machines could be kept running by people who weren't factory mechanics.
So what did they do?
They established the first service school in Milwaukee, specifically to train Army mechanics. Now, think about the long-term structural effect of that. They were just producing bikes. They were producing trained experts.
A whole cohort of specialized mechanics who knew that V-twin engine inside and out.
Because they had to rebuild it under battlefield conditions. So this technical diaspora, they all return home after the war. And they become the backbone of the independent repair shops. And critically, the massive customization market.
So that's the very ecosystem that would later sustain the brand when its own corporate quality completely collapsed.
Precisely. The necessity of wartime standardization accidentally fueled the later culture of highly personalized customization. It's a fascinating feedback loop.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics of how warfare constrained their engineering decisions, because this really defines the mechanical identity of the brand. We should probably contrast the civilian WL model with the famous military WLA model, the Liberator.
The differences are not cosmetic at all. They illustrate immediate, high-priority system constraints. The WLA had to survive environments the civilian bike would never even see.
The air filtration system is a perfect example of this, isn't it?
It is. The civilian WL used a standard mesh filter, which was perfectly adequate for paved roads in America. But the military WLA was equipped with a heavy-duty oil bath filtration system
Why the change?
because it was critical to mitigating engine wear. Field reports were coming back saying the mesh filters were clogging instantly in the dusty, off-road, unpaved environments of the European and North African theaters. The oil bath system drastically reduced particulate entry, which extended the operational life of the engine under extreme duress.
So it's a direct response to an environmental constraint that was imposed by the conflict itself.
Exactly. And while the WLA kept that air-cooled V-twin, which would become Harley's signature sound and look, Harley was actually willing to abandon their entire established architecture when the constraints demanded it.
You're talking about the experimental XA model.
The XA, yeah. It was developed for desert warfare in North Africa. The XA is maybe the ultimate illustration of military constraint driving innovative engineering.
Because they were worried about sand infiltration destroying the components.
Sand is the enemy of any machine with moving parts. So to prevent it from getting in, they abandoned the V-twin altogether. They used a European-style boxer twin engine configuration, and critically, they replaced the exposed chain drive with an entirely enclosed shaft drive.
Wait. So a Harley with a boxer engine and a shaft drive. That sounds completely alien to the brand's identity today.
It was an immediate, logical, systemic response to a very specific problem. Sand. The chain drive is highly vulnerable to abrasive sand particles, which act like sandpaper on the sprocket and the chain. The shaft drive sealed everything away.
Did it ever see mass production?
No, it never did. But it proves that when the stakes were highest, Military Victory HD's engineering system was highly adaptive. They were willing to ditch heritage for function. The military requirement for reliability essentially built the durability reputation that the civilian brand would rely on for decades.
So the V-twin heritage is strong, but the actual foundation of the company is built on answering the urgent, practical demands of war. That rugged, over-engineered quality, born out of military necessity, later becomes the selling point for the civilian market.
Having established that industrial foundation, we now have to pivot to the cultural synthesis. Because after 1945, Harley-Davidson transcended being just a machine. It became a symbol of freedom.
And this was driven by the flood of returning soldiers who had experienced motorcycling firsthand in the military.
Right, but this shift wasn't random. It was tied to a profound socio-historical tension in post-war America. These veterans were embodying a specific identity that was forged by conflict, but that identity didn't really fit the new corporate environment back home.
Explain that. What was that identity?
Researchers define this clash using the concept of habitus, which is the deeply ingrained habits, skills, and dispositions that someone acquires through experience. The returning veterans possessed what's called the hypermasculine form, or the soldier-laborer habitus.
So an identity grounded in physical risk, action, corporeal strength, and self-sufficiency. If you were a mechanic, a grunt, or a truck driver in the war, your skill set was physical and mechanical.
Precisely. But when they came home, they often found themselves ill-prepared for the new consumerist bureaucratic reality. They felt disillusioned with the societal pressure to conform to the nuclear family ideal and the rising expectations of managerial masculinity.
The white-collar suit and tie identity.
Exactly. An identity that prized familial responsibility, conformity, and conspicuous consumption. The soldier-laborer mindset, which was an absolute asset on the battlefield, became a liability in the post-war managerial economy.
That's a brilliant way to frame the tension. They had this powerful physical identity, but modern America didn't have a place for it, so they created their own space.
And that tension just exploded into the public consciousness in 1947 at the Hollister Rally in California.
Hollister. This became the genesis point of the entire North American motorcycle mythology. It was the 4th of July Gypsy Tour, and something like 2,000 to 4,000 motorcyclists converged on this tiny town.
The scale alone was guaranteed to cause friction, and the chaos quickly followed. Drunken riders turned San Benito Street into an impromptu drag strip. The local jail filled up, and the police tallied over $2,000 in fines for public drunkenness and disturbing the peace.
But what's critical here is the economic reality versus the media narrative.
Yes. While the police were busy, the local bars, the shops, the gas stations, they were making a fortune. The income generated by the partying bikers likely surpassed the economic damage caused by all the antics.
But the media ignored the economics and focused purely on the spectacle of menace.
That's where the narrative was manufactured. The San Francisco Chronicle picked up the story, but it was Life magazine that really cemented the legend globally.
Life's July 21st, 1947 issue. They ran that infamous photo, which we now know was staged.
A clearly drunken man, bottles strewn around his feet, slumped over a bike, and they titled it, "Cyclist's Holiday. He and friends terrorized the town." The manipulation was just so clear.
And for maximum effect, Life juxtaposed that staged photo opposite a mannequin wearing an ape mask. The implication was unmistakable.
That motorcyclists, particularly the rowdy ones, were nothing more than dehumanized animals or thugs. This sensationalism created the perfect narrative scapegoat for post-war anxieties.
And that sensationalism led directly to the creation of the famous one-percenter doctrine, a statement of division that proved to be a self-fulfilling prophecy.
That's right. The story goes that in response to the massive public backlash fueled by Life, an AMA spokesperson, the American Motorcyclist Association, allegedly disavowed the bad apples.
The spokesperson, often cited as a man named Kukler, reportedly stated that the rowdy element constituted only 1% of the total number of motorcyclists, and that the other 99% were law-abiding enthusiasts.
And here's the most important systemic mechanic. Whether the specific quote was entirely accurate, or whether the AMA later denied the origins of the phrase, which they did, it didn't matter.
It didn't matter. The media had created an image, and the AMA had created a clear exclusionary division.
It provided the perfect identity for the riders who felt scorned and disenfranchised. By calling them the 1%, the system inadvertently granted them symbolic capital. The outlaws embraced the label, literally sewing the 1% patch onto their jackets.
So the AMA intended to sanitize the image, but instead they helped solidify the very outlaw myth they were trying to distance themselves from.
And Hollywood, seeing the media frenzy and the built-in antagonist just piled on, the 1953 film The Wild One, based loosely on the Hollister events, initiated a veritable moral panic over juvenile delinquency.
Which was perfectly aligned with broader Cold War anxieties about internal threats to the social fabric.
And Hollywood didn't use the reality. The real Hollister biker was often an older, maybe overweight veteran. Hollywood cast Marlon Brando as the leader, Johnny Strabbler. Young, handsome, and impeccably styled in the black leather jacket and blue jeans.
They traded the repulsive reality for irresistible, attractive menace.
They absolutely did. And that black leather jacket, which becomes the key element of the HD iconography, is a fascinating systemic mechanic of style.
So why black leather specifically?
Well, the black leather jacket became the definitive symbol of powerful corporeal masculinity. Historically, military flying jackets were brown, symbolizing heroism and the friendly ally. Black leather, in contrast, was often associated with the German Gestapo or SS units.
So it imported a sinister, malevolent character, a rebellious anti-hero aesthetic.
Exactly. And this look reinforced the identity the wearer wanted to project, the hyper-masculine soldier laborer or habitus, but now it's sexualized and defiant. Brando's character, Johnny, he possessed minimal economic capital, yet he wielded overwhelming corporeal masculinity, making him an erotic fetish for the mainstream culture he rejected.
And this brings us to the commodification structure that defines the modern Harley-Davidson brand.
This is the key. Capitalists, the manufacturers, the apparel companies, the marketers, they appropriated this powerful grassroots rebellious image, which was amplified by Hollywood, and they sold it right back to the public.
So the consumer wasn't buying a motorcycle anymore. They were buying membership into what sociologists call a consumer tribe. They were buying the identity of the outlaw.
They were trying to achieve that hyper-masculine rebellious status, whether they ever actually rode a bike or not. It's brand capital built on downward emulation.
So affluent middle-class consumers, particularly the emerging baby boomer demographic, could flirt with a dangerous countercultural lifestyle through a t-shirt or a jacket. They were buying the story, not just the steel.
Turning an emblem of anti-establishment defiance into a commercial fashion accessory. That symbolic capital would prove to be the brand's ultimate structural defense later on.
Okay, so it's clear that Harley-Davidson was functionally selling a mythology built on this military-grade foundation. But by the mid-20th century, that foundation starts to buckle under industrial entropy.
And that was primarily driven by the massive post-World War II challenge posed by Japanese manufacturing.
Right. After the war, geopolitical constraints forced Japan and Germany to rebuild their industrial base, and they focused on advanced manufacturing and precision engineering.
Which leads to the emergence of the big four Japanese motorcycle companies: Honda, Suzuki, Yamaha, and Kawasaki.
And Honda, in particular, mounted this brilliant marketing counter-strategy against the grimy outlaw image.
Their seminal campaign, "You Meet the Nicest People on a Honda," it deliberately gentrified the image of motorcycling. They positioned their bikes as fun, clean, and friendly recreation.
So they were effectively targeting the youth and middle-class demographics that had been alienated by that whole one percenter image.
And crucially, this marketing was backed by technological superiority. In 1969, Honda launched the CB750.
The first superbike.
It's widely credited with initiating the superbikes trend. It was fast, reliable, efficient, and it used precision engineering that made contemporary HD engines look decades outdated.
So the resulting cultural clash was deep, and it manifested directly in the mechanics of the bikes themselves.
It did. The efficient, precise, easy-to-maintain Japanese bikes, they represented the new white-collar managerial identity, what academics termed the managerial professional erotics.
And you contrast that with the American machines. HD bikes were rugged, heavy, required constant mechanical attention. They leaked oil and were built on designs from the 30s and 40s.
They represented the corporeal hardness of the old-school soldier labor habitus. While consumers might have admired the look and the myth of the American machine, many of them ultimately preferred the reliable substance of Japanese technology.
And this industrial vulnerability was then structurally compounded by a really terrible management decision. Harley-Davidson was acquired by American Machine and Foundry Company, AMF, in 1969.
Yeah, the AMF years, the investment was there. AMF pumped about $60 million into the division. But the crucial structural constraint was a management mandate that prioritized volume over quality.
Just get them out the door.
Just get them out the door. Production volume exploded, jumping from 27,000 units in 1969 to over 60,000 by 1972. They were focused entirely on maximizing throughput.
And the consequences were just catastrophic for the technical integrity and the reputation of the brand.
We're not talking about minor flaws. We're talking about systemic failure. By 1980, the quality control figures were damning. More than half, over 50% of the Harley-Davidsons rolling off the assembly line failed final inspection.
Failed inspection. So they needed significant repairs before they could even reach the dealer floor.
That's right. It's an astonishing failure rate. You compare that to the Japanese bikes, where the failure rate was reportedly only 5%.
So dealers were so accustomed to the HD quality issues that they were, placing cardboard underneath new Harleys in the showroom just to soak up the chronic oil leaks.
That's what the stories say. The nickname hog began to take on a very negative connotation, and the market responded logically to this quality collapse.
HD's domestic market share plunged to 5% overall. And by 1981, they lost control of their core market, the super heavyweight class.
Even there, they fell behind Honda. The industrial crisis was so severe that it forced a radical structural solution: a leveraged buyout, an LBO, in 1981.
By a group of loyal executives led by Von Beals and Willie G. Davidson, they realized the company could only be saved by insiders who were committed to the brand.
But the timing for the LBO was just awful. The U.S. was in the throes of a protracted recession with cripplingly high interest rates. In 1982, the year after the buyout, HD posted a massive $25 million operating loss. They were facing insolvency.
So this external constraint, the recession and the debt load, it forced a rapid internal systemic response.
It did. The new management team realized they couldn't compete on myth alone. They had to fix the machine. So they made the difficult, necessary decision to stop relying on American industrial dogma and instead began deliberately mimicking the production systems pioneered by Japanese manufacturers.
Things like just-in-time production, statistical process control.
Quality circles, all of it. And the turnaround was truly phenomenal. It illustrates the power of organizational commitment to internal constraints. They managed to reverse the decline shockingly fast.
By 1987, the percentage of bikes that were certified ready to ride straight off the assembly line soared from below 50% to an incredible 99%.
And at the same time, productivity rose by 50%, and annual revenues per employee effectively doubled between 1981 and 1987. The crisis forced efficiency and quality rigor onto the system.
But wait, how did they survive long enough to implement those changes? That quality improvement takes time, and they were bleeding cash in the early 80s.
That's where the cultural capital became their ultimate industrial survival mechanism. While they were fixing the machine, they doubled down on the myth.
They focused new marketing efforts exclusively on their loyal core base, recognizing that about 75% of HD riders were repeat purchasers.
They weren't just selling a vehicle, they were selling the Harley experience. That loyalty was expressed not just in repeat purchases, but in apparel sales, attendance at rallies, and the extreme lengths riders went to, like getting the Bar and Shield logo permanently tattooed on their bodies.
So that fanatic loyalty basically bought the company the time and the margin it needed to rebuild the industrial structure.
And finally, they benefited from critical political intervention. HDE successfully lobbied the U.S. government for protection, receiving tariffs on Japanese motorcycles imported into the U.S. in the super heavyweight class.
It created a structural barrier against their key competitors.
It did. But here's the masterstroke of public relations that solidified the perception of their turnaround. In 1987, confident in their new quality and efficiency, HD voluntarily asked the U.S. government to rescind those tariffs a full year ahead of schedule.
That was a powerful symbolic move.
It was HD signaling to the world and their domestic audience that they no longer needed the crutch of government protection. It confirmed that the system had achieved competitive confidence based on merit, not just political structure.
So that impressive turnaround secured HD's viability for the next few decades. But as we move into the 21st century, the system faces a whole new convergence of tensions.
Driven by aging core demand, globalized constraints, and identity friction. We have to start with the most certain threat: demographic collapse.
Because Harley-Davidson's historical success was largely based on capturing the affluent baby boomer generation who had the disposable income to buy into the myth.
And the challenge now is that motorcycles are a product class where the core group of customers is simply aging out of riding. For context, in 2003, the average HD owner earned over US $80,000 annually. This heavy concentration in an affluent aging clientele represents an eventual dead end for the traditional business model.
Demographics are predictable. If your main source of demand is consistently moving into retirement age, your demand pool is shrinking.
So the systemic solution is mandatory. HD must either find new customers who fit the current product's demographics or fundamentally diversify the product to attract new segments. If they fail, they risk stalling revenue growth entirely.
And this challenge dictated their hardwire strategy announced in 2021.
Right, which is primarily a defensive strategy. Strengthen the most profitable core segments, touring, large cruiser models, and trikes, which still appeal to that loyal, affluent base.
But at the same time, the strategy has to push into new territory to diversify revenue streams.
Which is why we saw the introduction of the Pan America Adventure Bike, a radical departure from traditional cruisers, as well as expansion into financial services and the certified pre-owned bike market. They're trying to squeeze every last drop of value out of the existing user base while cautiously probing for the next generation.
And that leads us directly to the second major tension, the offshoring paradox.
Yes, HD's entire symbolic capital is built on the Made in America promise. Yet global economic realities and trade tariffs structurally force supply chain fragmentation.
This is a direct conflict between the myth and the margin. When the EU imposed retaliatory tariffs on American goods, HD faced a choice. Either absorb massive cost increases, making their bikes uncompetitive in a major market, or
restructure production. And they chose the logical economic path. To bypass those EU tariffs and efficiently access the massive growing Asian markets, HD made the necessary decision to open or expand production facilities in Thailand, Brazil, and India.
a purely rational response to external trade constraints.
But the backlash within the Made in America system was immediate and severe. U.S. manufacturing bodies like the International Association of Machinists publicly tore into the company.
The IAM specifically called the move a kick in the teeth to American workers and a betrayal of the company's legacy.
Which perfectly illustrates the constraint. The cultural value of the brand, the Made in America identity, is directly contradicted by the economic incentive to maintain global competitiveness and profit margins.
And the complexity deepens when you look at the bike itself. Even the motorcycles that are assembled in the U.S. rely heavily on a global supply chain for high-tech components.
Right, things like braking systems from Brembo in Italy or electronics from Bosch in Germany. The American Harley is, in fact, an interconnected product of the global system, regardless of its final assembly point.
Which brings us to internal labor relations. HD has a long union history.
Primarily with the UAW and later the United Steelworkers and the IAM. Following the 1981 LBO, labor relations formalized into a supposed partnering agreement.
intended to move away from the traditional adversarial environment.
But that partnership system broke down significantly. The tensions escalated in 2010 when HD management forced a concessionary contract on the unions. The threat was explicit: agree to significant cuts in benefits and wages, or HD would move work out of Wisconsin altogether.
A classic constraint structure using the threat of offshoring to force domestic labor concessions.
And the workers felt blindsided. And here we see a fascinating internal political paradox related to trade policy. Some Harley-Davidson workers, rooted in the idea of protecting American industry, favored steel and aluminum tariffs, believing it would protect their jobs.
But the irony is sharp. Those very tariffs increased the cost of finished metals for HHD management.
And management responded rationally, shifting production for foreign markets offshore to circumvent retaliatory tariffs, meaning the political position favored by some workers unintentionally constrained the company's ability to keep the work domestic. The system just cannibalizes itself.
And finally, HD faces the monumental challenge of attracting new demographics, women, younger writers, minorities, without suffering fatal brand dilution among their core, traditional, and highly profitable clientele.
The risk of dilution is tangible. If they launch products or license their name in ways inconsistent with the core identity, they risk alienating everyone.
We saw this with Tropicana's 2009 redesign failure, where sales dropped 20% simply due to inconsistent messaging and a sudden shift away from heritage aesthetics.
And the internal tension surrounding new demographics is striking. HD recognized the LGBTQ plus demographic, for instance, as ideal customers. They often have disposable income, possess that historical outsider's mentality, and are attracted to the countercultural aesthetic.
But the company, according to sources, feared that acknowledging this demographic too openly would cause the traditionally exclusive core writer to leave.
It could potentially force a total revision of what the company stood for. That fear shows how rigid the hypermasculine outlaw myth still is as a structural constraint on marketing.
Yet they are making progress in some segments. Women riders are the fastest growing segment in motorcycling.
They are. And research indicates these women often consciously engage in what's called performativity and appearance labor. They are actively defining a new identity by softening the old outlaw stereotypes.
But even with corporate support, systemic friction remains at the distribution level. The dealers.
Right. The dealers, who are the face of the brand, have been known to perpetuate an exclusive clique mentality, sometimes treating women riders poorly or asking rude, condescending questions. The behavior of the dealer network often actively undermines the corporate efforts toward demographic inclusiveness. It acts as a constraint on the marketing strategy itself.
So all of these tensions lead us to the ultimate one, the electrified future.
The ultimate systemic tension facing Harley-Davidson is the fundamental technological shift toward electrification. HD's CEO, Jochen Zeitz, has been clear that at some point in time, Harley-Davidson will be all-electric, emphasizing this is a necessary long-term strategic transition.
The vehicle for this difficult transition is the LiveWire brand, which they wisely spun out as an entirely separate publicly traded entity.
And LiveWire is fundamentally focused on silent, instant torque performance, a massive technological and sensory departure from the traditional HD experience.
The operational constraints here must be immense.
They are, primarily financial and existential. Establishing leadership in a new, technologically intense segment is incredibly expensive. LiveWire has been hemorrhaging cash, facing operational losses of $110 million in 2024, and is projected to lose another $70–80 million in 2025.
And the sales volume is tiny. It's still below 1,000 units, even though investment has doubled.
It highlights the difficulty of migrating cultural capital built on one type of engine to a completely different silent platform.
Despite the losses, their strategic initiatives show HD knows diversification is mandatory.
Absolutely. Beyond LiveWire, they are investing in the high-margin Pan America adventure bike platform. And crucially, they have plans to re-enter the critical entry-level segment with a model priced under $6,000 by 2026.
Reaching that price point is essential for attracting younger riders who simply can't afford the $20,000 plus cruisers.
And they're achieving this through collaborations like the one with Hero MotoCorp in India, leveraging international manufacturing expertise to create mid-capacity platforms.
But the core identity tension is unavoidable. The LiveWire is strangely quiet.
It's a direct, almost philosophical contrast to the iconic, loud V-twin engine sound that has defined the brand's heritage, its performance identity, and its sensory presence in the public square.
You can't overstate the importance of that sound. It is a primal cultural identifier. The sound is the freedom, the danger, the rebellion. The live wire is essentially selling silence and efficiency, the exact qualities that were symbolized by the managerial erotics of the Japanese bikes HD fought against 40 years ago.
And interestingly, the Livewire is already finding utility in a technical, institutional, and distinctly anti-rebellious application.
Which is?
They're manufacturing the S2 Patrol Del Mar and Alpinista models specifically for police departments.
That is a fascinating systemic loop back to their origins, leveraging the unique benefits of the electric platform, low heat, minimal vibration, smooth maneuverability for urban patrol or motorcade duty.
It's the new institutional utility of the machine, mirroring how the military anchored the brand back in the 1910s. The key incentive for pursuing electrification, even at a massive financial loss right now, is justifying premium pricing and high margins later.
So by positioning Livewire as a technologically advanced, market-leading product in the EV space, they're aiming to replicate the early success of the Honda CB750, a machine that commanded high prices because it delivered cutting-edge technology.
Right, and looking at the long-term system mechanics, HD is aiming for a double-digit operating margin by 2026 with a long-term goal of 15%. Achieving these ambitious financial targets hinges entirely on solving this cultural mechanical puzzle.
The fundamental challenge for the system's survival really depends on one core question.
Can Harley-Davidson successfully decouple the V-twin machine from the hypermasculine outlaw myth? Or are the machine and the myth so inextricably linked that the failure of one, say, the eventual obsolescence of the internal combustion engine, inevitably leads to the dissolution of the entire system and the symbolic capital it relies on?
That was a tremendous ride through the structures that built and now constrain this American icon. We've synthesized the core tensions that sustain the Harley-Davidson system, the military foundation that enforced durability versus the civilian outlaw myth that provided its symbolic capital.
The catastrophic AMF quality collapse versus the strategic turnaround enabled by fanatical customer loyalty.
The Made in America promise versus the global supply chain reality imposed by economic constraints.
The aging core clientele versus the absolute necessity of demographic diversification.
And finally, the famous V-twin sound versus the silent, electrified future. The system is currently operating at a peak state of tension.
So if the core Harley experience is fundamentally rooted in the aesthetics, the noise, and the corporeal hypermasculinity of that soldier-laborer habitus, can HD market quiet, efficient, technologically superior electric bikes, which appeal to a completely different consumer erotics, without fatally diluting the symbolic capital that has sustained the system for decades.
And as the company attempts to balance the demands of the traditionally exclusive core rider who fears change, with the structural necessity of reaching new, diverse, and younger demographics for growth, how long can the organization tolerate that internal dissonance, that clash between heritage as an anchor and growth as a necessity, before one structural incentive permanently constrains and defeats the other?
And one last thing. Considering the profound history of military procurement defining the HD system since World War I, is the new focus on police models, like the Livewire S2 Patrol, a calculated and deliberate attempt to re-leverage that institutional structure, that governmental procurement foundation, to anchor the difficult and financially costly transition toward an electric future.
Complex questions for a complex machine. Thank you for diving deep with us into the engineering, the culture, and the economy that is Harley-Davidson. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.